This is the brand new Arrma Fury, and I've got some big plans for this truck, but first, we've got to take a closer look at it because there's some parts on here that aren't shared with any other vehicle. This is a 1/10 scale two-wheel drive short course truck. It shares the same basic platform with the Arrma Gorgon. The retaining clips are up under the body here, and this body's kind of sharp. They're a little bit difficult to get to. However, once you do get to them, you just pull the retaining clips out in the front and in the rear, and then the body lifts straight off. This body actually feels reasonably thick for its size. It does not have a full cage inside, but it does have reinforcement in the front and rear that's associated with that clipless body system. There are no roof skids, so I suspect we're going to eat through these corners of the roof pretty quickly. Hopefully an aftermarket manufacturer will come up with some skids for it. Overall, I think this body looks really nice, though there aren't any vents in the rear, so we're probably going to get some pretty serious parachuting when we jump this, and we will jump this. Underneath the body, we have a brand new low center of gravity long wheelbase chassis. This is similar to the chassis on the Gorgon, but as opposed to the Gorgon, which has a higher center of gravity, this thing keeps the battery down nice and low, which should improve handling. Here you can get a closer look at that clipless body system. When you push this in, it engages two little tabs on the body itself. And now to take a closer look at the suspension, we'll get these tires off using the included wrench. Along with that wrench, you get two really nice full-size hex drivers with this. This is going to be great for someone who's buying their first car because most of the tools that come with these RC cars aren't very good. And it's really nice to see a set of actually usable tools coming with a car, especially a car that's this cheap. Obviously, if you're going to be in this hobby for very long, you're probably going to want to get better tools and even power tools. But like I said, it's nice to have something to get you started. Speaking of getting started, let's get started with these tires. They feel pretty decent. They have a medium firm compound that should wear well. The foams inside feel pretty good as well. The tires themselves are vented, which is really nice to see. And these tires are about 110 millimeters in diameter, 46 millimeters wide, and they've got 14 millimeter hexes. Those hexes are plastic, though they are on steel stub axles in the front and the rear. Let's go ahead and give these tools a try. Now make sure you stick around because we've got some really interesting things we're going to be doing with this car, and we're going to be putting those tires as well as everything else to the test. Now, pulling this apart, we've got a very simple pin system here for the steering. And then we can see here in the front, we do have ball bearings, which is nice to see at this price point. Pulling these hexes off, we can see we've got some fairly standard and beefy looking pins here, which means you should be able to put some 17 millimeter hex adapters on here without too much trouble. Moving inboard from that, we've got a combination of screws and screw retained pins for the hinges. These arms are the same arms that are used on the Gorgon, so they should be pretty easy to get. And let's take a closer look at one of these shocks. These are oil-filled shocks, so they should give you a nice plush ride. And we do have all hex hardware on this truck, which isn't a given at this price point, and the hardware seems to be typical Arrma quality. Taking a closer look at these shocks, we can see they are definitely oil-filled shocks. They are fairly simple though, and they're actually a little bit different from most of the shocks you've seen. These are similar to the ones that are on the 3S and 4S trucks. If you haven't seen how these work, instead of coming apart at the top, they actually come apart at the bottom. This tool is used to take them apart. You simply align this with the little notches, and then the bottom of the shock disassembles. We can see we've got nice silicone O-rings in there. The original 3S trucks had problems with the shocks leaking, and that's because they didn't use good O-rings. They've since fixed that problem though. And we've got a very basic looking piston in here, and there's definitely some oil in there. Because of the way these go together, you can see there's a notch in these threads, and that's designed to let air out while you're screwing it together. You can see those little bubbles coming up. If it didn't have that, this shock could get airlocked, which would cause it to not work properly because the shock itself would end up acting as an air spring, which is really not something that you want because it can cause some undesirable rebound effects. Those shocks are connected to plastic shock towers that are unique between this, the Gorgon, and the Vorteks two-wheel drive. Behind that, we've got a pretty basic plastic geared servo. As with pretty much all Arrma cars, this is said to be waterproof. Let's take one of these screws out and make sure there's an O-ring on it. And yeah, you can see there, they've got O-rings on here. I'm sure this will have gaskets as well, and it should be at least reasonably water resistant. Make sure you stick around though, because this is definitely going to be getting upgraded down the road. Running that is a brushed Spectrum 2-in-1 receiver. Unfortunately, that means when we upgrade this, we're going to be putting a new receiver on as well. That receiver is going to be controlled by a very basic SLT2 transmitter. This transmitter works just fine. It does have a throttle limiter on it, and overall works well enough at this price point. Behind that 2-in-1 receiver, you can see we have a place for a fan, but no fan itself. And then below that, we've got a big brushed motor. To save time, let's switch back to power tools. These do feel pretty decent though. That motor is going to be putting down power through a plastic spur gear. That does have an adjustable slipper clutch on it, and that's going to be powered through a sintered steel pinion gear. While I'm taking this out, you can see just how beefy the gears are on this platform, which is a good thing because we're going to be putting those gears to the test. This is a fluid-filled differential, and the fluid feels pretty thin in here. You can see it's attached to some plastic universals. I'll be curious to see how these universals hold up to big power in a little bit. Pulling this differential apart, I'm actually kind of surprised to see that it's grease-filled and not fluid-filled. Let's make sure this actually is a sealed differential. We do have a gasket here, but let's make sure we have O-rings as well. If you're not familiar with how these axles come off, you've got to put a driver all the way down the axle to get the screw off here on the end. You will need a long driver for this. Fortunately, this car comes with one. And pulling this side gear out of here, we can see that, yes, there is an O-ring here, which kind of makes me shake my head and wonder, why did they put grease in this? I get that it probably saves them a couple of cents to do so, but if you want to run fluid in this differential, that means you've got to figure out how to get all that grease out of there, and that can be a real pain, as the silicone fluid and whatever this petroleum-based grease is probably won't mix well. I would definitely like to see them make a running change to put fluid in these differentials. These are the same differentials you'll see in the 3 and 4S trucks, and they do work pretty well. Another thing I'd like to see them change, if they're going to keep running grease, is to stop using grease with a high sulfur content. This is clearly bearing grease, which is fine, but it kind of stinks, and when it gets on things, it makes them stink too. Last thing we need to take a look at is this bottom access battery compartment. Pretty easy to get to. However, I did see an IC3 in here. This is fine. I'm sure the battery that comes with this is an IC3, but I bet most people that are going to be using their own batteries are going to have IC5s, so I'd like to see that instead here. All right, let me get all this put back together, and let's see what this new LCG chassis can do. Bone stock on 2S. Let's see how fast she is. She does burnouts. Oh, the brakes are really touchy. Full throttle. It's pretty controllable. Yeah, brakes are really touchy. Full throttle. Not too bad. One more pass. This thing's gonna be fun. Let's bring it in and see how fast it is. 23 miles an hour. That's pretty good. Of course, we're gonna do much better with a brushless system. Let's see how it bashes stock. Guys, this thing's a ton of fun. If you have never experienced a two-wheel drive vehicle before, this might be a great first option. 23 miles an hour is reasonably fast enough for something like this, and it handles pretty well on and off-road. I was actually really impressed with it. However, I want to see what more power can do, but I want to do it on a budget. To that end, we're going to install a WP10BL60 G2 ESC. These are about 40 bucks. And then we're going to install this 3652 3250 kV motor from Hobbywing as well. I got this on sale for less than $30 on Amazon, so I think that's a pretty good deal. Of course, there are cheaper options for ESCs out there. However, I think Hobbywing represents the best combination of performance, reliability, and price. We're also going to be running this brushless system on 3S, and between the increased voltage and increased ampacity, we should be getting about double the power. I've also spec'd out the KV on this motor to give us about 50% more RPM. And because these motors have the same size shaft, it should allow us to just go ahead and use the same pinion, saving us a little bit more money. A brushless motor is inherently more efficient than a brushed motor is. As the name implies, a brushed motor has physical brushes in here that transfer the energy. A brushless motor uses an electronic algorithm for that energy transfer, so there are no contacts in here. All right, as some of you are doubtlessly aware, this 3652 doesn't quite fit in this chassis. You could make it fit by doing a little bit of trimming or pushing these wires really hard out of the way, but I don't really want to do that. So instead, we're going to go with this Spectrum 3150 kV motor. It's a little bit longer, so it should fit in there better. I looked online, this isn't really that much more expensive. Plus, there are definitely generic motor options available on Amazon pretty inexpensively. Just need to get this cover back on, get the new ESC stuck down using my favorite VHB. Now, if you're enjoying watching me upgrade this car, make sure you get subscribed because we've got some big plans for this thing, assuming it survives this bashing session. There we go. Now I'm just going to tidy up this wiring, install my receiver. We'll see you outside. The KV of this motor ended up being just a little bit less than I was expecting, so let's see how fast it is. Oh, she's definitely got more power. Let's see if we can keep it under control. Oh, it's going to be tough. Full throttle. That is a lot faster. Full throttle. Let's see if we can get one more clean pass out of it. There we go. Okay, let's see what that was. 35 miles an hour. That is way faster than it was before. Let's see how it handles that extra power. Guys, I can tell you right now, Arrma has a winner on their hands with this brand new Fury truck. This thing is an absolute blast, and even with the larger power system on 3S, it handled it absolutely perfectly. I only had one problem with this entire thing, and that's after this last bash session, I had to use a pair of pliers to get this rear latch open. The front latch was fine, but I could not get the rear latch open by hand. That's kind of compounded by the fact that you're reaching your hand in under the body and it's cutting your hand while you're doing it. However, everything else on this thing performed absolutely admirably, even though we put way more power in it than it was originally designed for. And I think this budget 3S power system is great. The 10BL60G2 is an awesome ESC for not a lot of money. And whereas this Arrma motor worked well, you could get other motors on Amazon that'll be quite a bit cheaper than this. Now, of course, all that makes me want to find where the limits of this thing are, which is why in the next video, we're going to be putting some big big tires on this thing, which is probably gonna mean we're gonna have to trim that body, putting even more power in it, and seeing if we can make a real monster out of this truck. If you wanna see that, make sure you get subscribed. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in one of these.